what could this incentive be, and why could cooperatives be the correct legal form for this? How can we as a community who are already convinced of these values lobby more heavily in politics, in policy making, and have this make a change? This brings us to our next panel that will be headed up by Melanie Mettler, who will be discussing with our guests today. Helen, I look forward to this panel discussion. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Leah. Welcome. Framework conditions for social economy. How do they look like? Do they work? Can we improve these framework conditions? Can we improve the environment? Is there such a thing as best practice? And I have a couple of very eminent speakers here with me on the panel. Melanie Mettler, National Counsel for the Green Liberal Party and Vice President of GLP Switzerland. She studied literature, cultural studies, linguistics. She's co-manager of an information portal for employers on professional integration, and she co-founded the Social Innovation Bern Accelerator, the SIBA platform. This is a platform that brings together private, public, and civil society players. She's also co-founder of the crowdfunding project Sundraising, which finances community solar installations in urban Bern neighborhoods. And she has a great deal of experience when it comes to social economy. And then, to my right, Adrian Wittmann, who studied environmental sciences at ETH Zurich. He later added an executive MBA from the HCG in St. Gallen. He became an entrepreneur through fair trade, and he's lived in the United States, Colombia, and Brazil to do so. He is a co-founder of Gebana CEO. Gebana started as an association in the eastern part of Switzerland, became a public limited company in 1998, and is now considered a pioneer in the creation of sustainable global trade chains for food. Its business model is direct marketing between producer and end customer. To my left is Nick Gucker, also a member of the National Council based in Winterthur. He's been a national councillor for the People's Party since 2007. He studied social work and social management. He was head of the Verbindungskirche Winterthur, a youth church financed by the Evangelical Reformed Church of the Canton of Zurich. And he's a part-time co-founder, member of the board of directors of the consulting company Herzkraftwerk AG in Winterthur, which offers coaching for decision makers from business and non-profit organizations. And he's also owner of Concordia, a restaurant in Winterthur, and he sells his own ginger-based drink. And then last but not least, far left, Samuel Brüllisauer. He holds a Master in Development Studies from the Graduate Institute in Geneva and a degree in International Relations from the University of St. Gallen. He's been working for UNRISD since 2019. 2019 is the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development. He focuses on social and solidarity economy, in particular policy design and sustainability management. He too has a great deal of experience with the solidarity economy, being a member of the Project AIR, a cooperative, and he's also setting up a fair B&B right now. Okay, so we have a great deal of experience around the table. Let's start by asking our panelists about their personal experience as social entrepreneurs. What would you consider a good environment in Switzerland? So what's particularly good about Switzerland? Well, it's easy to set up a cooperative in Switzerland. It's easy to get started in cooperation with other people. If you invest some time into a good idea and describe it in a proper document, you can get started fairly quickly in Switzerland. Things get a bit more difficult when you try to establish yourself and start growing, but we'll get to that in detail in a few minutes. Adrian Wittmer, what do you like about Switzerland as a kind of breeding ground for social enterprises? Switzerland offers good framework conditions for companies in general. And when it comes to social enterprises, there's not too many of them, so you can't really judge the framework conditions for social enterprises. There's no such thing. You can just describe the environment as a whole. Mr. Cooper, in your opinion, what's good about Switzerland and its conditions? Thank you for having me here. Thank you for letting me talk here as part of this panel. We've heard before that Switzerland is a country that has created good framework conditions for companies, but Switzerland has not understood yet what the added value is of having social entrepreneurs in Switzerland. It's not about subsidies. A social entrepreneur is characterized by trying to share with others and bringing together people. Well, Mr. Bulisauer, you've researched a great deal when it comes to the situation in Switzerland and abroad. Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be able to talk in a panel in Switzerland. As has been said before, Switzerland is a country that offers a good environment for companies, but it's not really focused on social enterprises. So social enterprises have quite a low profile in Switzerland. We've conducted case studies regarding different regions and cities that have an active social economy policy, and these studies are quite revealing, and I believe Switzerland could learn from these findings. So what countries offer good conditions? Well, South Korea, Canada, to name just two. Quebec offers excellent conditions, but Barcelona, to name a country or a city within the European Union, has very favorable conditions for social enterprises and pursues a very active policy in that area. So these are cities we can learn from. So what, Melanie, would you like to have? We decided that we're going to have this panel discussion very informally. What, in your opinion, would you need in terms of an environment? Well, the SIBA accelerator in Bern, and my work there has shown me that it's important that we think differently. We need to bring people together. We need to set up a network and make sure that we can exchange information about funding. But that's a task for the entrepreneurs themselves, isn't it? Yes, of course. But of course, many entrepreneurs are busy thinking about how they could best organize their idea or implement the idea. But I believe authorities, the economy as a whole, could invest in that kind of activity, in that kind of consulting. Do you get any sort of help in Bern, in the canton or city of Bern? We do get help if we need it. There's innovation centers on a cantonal governmental level. Some of them are even financed by the canton. You can get help when it comes to business creation, but what we do not get is anyone helping us making the best use of our potential. Adrian, Gebana has been around for some time and you'd be very successful right now, but there's been ups and downs in your history. So where do you see the biggest hurdles? What would have to change for you to be more successful? Well, just a comment regarding what you just said. It would be great to have a social entrepreneur hill in a canton instead of a crypto cave, for example. It would be helpful if the authorities would look at the long-term benefits and needs also of social enterprises and help us with that. But to come back to your question, when it comes to Gabbana, our main problem initially was financing, and I believe that's a problem we share with many other startups. And with regard to financing, legislation needs to change because it's very difficult for us as small companies to get financing from the big banks. Many people like what we do, but they cannot really help us finance us. It's not possible to get funding from members. That was illegal for many years in the canton of Bern, so we had to change our approach towards funding. So legislation needs to change. Is that what you say? Yes. What about you, Nick Cocker? I thought I saw you looking at me. We are working hard within the National Council to try and change things. I myself have submitted an interpellation. I want to support social entrepreneurs, and I'm curious to see what the reaction to my question to the National Council is going to be. As Adrian said, we need legislation to change, and we will be also talking about competition later on. Competition is not fair, or the conditions for different types of company are not the same. So we have a certain distortion when it comes to competition. And we've heard from you, Samuel, you are a researcher, and you told us about Canada. Canada provides excellent conditions for social entrepreneurs, and my dream is to have a level playing field when it comes to competition. My problem quite often is that the code I will submit in a tender just cannot keep up with everyone else. So you need a social approach when tenders are developed by authorities. Yes, exactly. This is what I've been trying to do for the past 20 years, even on a cantonal level. We need a social approach within tenders. And I'm curious to see whether we've learned anything from the pandemic. Are we going to show more solidarity towards everyone else? Is there going to be more participation also in companies? Samuel Brusau, are there any best practice examples we could learn from? But not just as politicians too. Well, you need to be careful when you talk about best practice. There's different contexts that also influence the situation in a particular country. There's countries where the government will come in quite quickly and help, and that's what we tend to call best practice, even though we don't know whether it's the best practice. So Canada, Quebec, or South Korea have been mentioned as good examples or as regions with very good environments. Yes, these are cities and countries that offer excellent framework conditions. We have good conditions in Switzerland as well when it comes to establishing a company, but in contrast to Switzerland, in South Korea, for example, things are looked at differently. The government will sit together with the different players within the social economy. But there's different legal forms and they make things difficult. We heard earlier on about different types of cooperatives. cooperatives, and that means that you will have cooperatives with different needs. When it comes to good practices, therefore, you need to look at countries and cities on a case-by-case basis. But of course, there's many possibilities to support cooperatives financially. The government in Seoul, for example, has been setting up funds that will hand out money to social enterprises. So politicians or the government is actively promoting social enterprises, yes, in particular in cooperation with existing organizations. And this is something we don't really have yet in Switzerland. It's an interesting type of partnership. We've heard from Melanie earlier on that there's private players within the social economy that are actively financing cooperatives or other organizations that are becoming sponsors. And the example of Korea has shown that it's possible to very quickly set up contacts between private and public players. What about Barcelona? Barcelona is an interesting case because of its bottom-up approach. In Barcelona, the government is trying to change things actively and on a political basis. And therefore, attempts are being made in Barcelona to actively support economic or social economy players. And they are making platforms available for cooperation with these companies. So that's very interesting in terms of an example of an environment, of a positive environment for the social economy. Of course, it starts with setting up guidelines and legislation and then working on it to develop it together with social enterprises. What about you? What would you do if you were in the Swiss Department of Economy? What would you try to do? Speed things up? Well, I would like to come in and pick up what the previous speaker just said. I think there's things that can be corrected easily, others not. We need a change of culture to begin with. You need to have people who see themselves as facilitators, who want to coordinate and make things possible. But then Nick also spoke about the role the state has on the private market. The state publishes tenders that define the market in Switzerland. And if you have tenders and projects that are not social and that don't consider sustainability, then of course the state is going to influence the market in a negative way. I participated in a project where the state wanted to find out how it could make its tenders more sustainable and more social. And we decided that we need a change of culture. And has anything been done? Well, there are individual attempts, but we still find it difficult to have sustainability come in projects. No one will think about rethinking a tender. They will just look at the last tender that was written a couple of years ago, and then they will publish it in a very similar fashion. So it's about completely rewriting tenders. It's about setting up teams that will look at a tender and see whether it's possible to change it so it becomes more sustainable and social.
I'd like to come to Adrian now. You've been nodding all the while. So there has to be a certain price for the sustainability well, what I actually wanted to say is was the ping pong that you mentioned about procurement in particular, but actually it goes beyond that as well into the discussion of what's important in society. It's a type of contract that we have a certain freedom as a company because we contribute something to society. It's perhaps a little bit too narrowly as regards paying taxes, but on an organisation level, being really involved, and often there was a bit of complaining going on among representatives of the economy asking why they were not valued. And this is quite an interesting conversation being had. What kind of an economy do we want? It has to have market forces at play, yes, but we also want to shape that a bit. You have to pay taxes, you have to abide by laws, yes, but we want to have a certain level of integration. We want to have certain services, and there the market can do its thing. And then there are social entrepreneurs who say, we have a certain problem, let's say the environment. Now let's try to solve this problem together. And then as a company, you contribute your part. As a society, as say policymakers, you could try to use this to your advantage, but you have to have a conversation about what it is that you want. But so far, it's been very tough to push this through, hasn't it? I think it's really about what people are conscious of and the mindsets that people have in this regard. And this is something that really has to take root in people's minds. Christmas dinner, Baselstadt, I'm invited. Why does Basel City go to a good restaurant just because it's trendy? Why can't you just go to a restaurant that is committed to the social values that we want to support? Because they will be investing in perhaps those who are looking for an internship but aren't perhaps as mainstream acceptable. Perhaps they will be looking at beverages in a different light, at their sources of foodstuffs in a different light. The person who cleared the pavement earlier today, you thank that person. It's not just all about emails. And when we have tenders that are published, there are certain things that have to be met. There are requirements, ecological considerations, social considerations, and surely you have to make profit to a certain extent so that you can invest in society again as a social business. If you haven't got profit, so you need profit to survive as a company in any case, right? Well, yes, but why would I employ people in my company who aren't as good in their standing on the professional labor market? Well, why not? And you have to decide what's more important at that point. Okay, so who does a better job from a research perspective? I think what's interesting is that people work together in this regard. For instance, in case studies, we find time and again that there is a certain cultural model with the social economy being a partner of sorts, in that you can't just say you have different sectors in the economy and they all have different framework conditions. No, instead they're all aligned with a certain sustainability strategy. They have certain targets that they want to achieve that are important to people in society, ecological, socially sustainable policies, and that's where it's about working in that direction. So if you have tenders that we addressed earlier, if governments, but does this exist? Yes, there are points systems, if you like. If you have tenders being published and there are various candidates, then there are additional points awarded for different criteria. So in that case, it's valued. Yes, it's valued. It's acknowledged if a certain solution is better in that regard, or it's cheaper, essentially. And these things are considered, the social and ecological factors. And that is incorporated into this weighing up of which solution is better overall. And it should be considered a very important part of these considerations. So how can we, in various sectors, in the social economy, this could be housing, anything really. In all of these sectors, there must surely be opportunities to have the social economy play its part. And this mainstreaming, if you like, would require that it's not just one department, it's not compartmentalized in any way, but instead it's about identifying many manifold opportunities to have social economy do its thing. Okay, so it's not just the Department for Social Affairs, say. It's broader than that. Yes, it's broader than that, and there are different examples from different cities, from different governments that we've been looking at, and this can be manifested in various departments in government, and it can be successful. I'm really happy to hear you say that this can be successful and that it has to, in fact, be embraced by all departments, from the Ministry of Finance to Ministry of Construction. All of these departments have to consider things like public-private cooperation, having partnerships. Another practical example, I'd rather choose to move house employing movers who embrace my values. And maybe it will cost a little more, but what we're paying for then is having these values have higher prominence on the market. Well, there is this quite strict differentiation between companies and developmental aid. And different spheres are looking at this in far more advanced terms than us, but perhaps we should ask ourselves, what do we want? Is it that we want to have new jobs? Yes, okay, well then there are different ways to achieve this, and surely having a social economic approach is part of that. And I think it goes in the same direction as what you were saying before. It's not about having this be a separate aside from the economy, that it is a separate thing, that somehow solving problems by the by, but instead having companies themselves embrace socially minded values and having it be a bit more complexly integrated, having this mindset be a bit more widespread so that entrepreneurial thinking is not excluding that aspect. But developmental aid, surely with third world countries, that's relevant too. Well, yes. But I feel that we have a very clear divide between companies and aid. Just recently, we saw the national councillors went to Burkina Faso and they went to see what Switzerland was doing there, the difference they're making. Yes, okay, and there is one company that's doing something in that regard. That's us, right? That's our company, but nobody comes to see us to see what we're doing to help. And so, this is a very loose way of putting it, but I think it's important because it's a gap. It is a gap. It's almost like a silo thinking. I'd like to tack on to that. There's cultural change and networking and explanation, and these kind of things that pull everything together are very important. It's about having a new form of organization. And if everybody wanted to implement that at the same time, then we just go with it. Yes, but the problem is that we are moving within a realm of organizational structures that already exist. They're already there and rigid. And now we're trying to make this change, but somebody has to take this first step and have everybody make this shift. And when you're trying to do this, there are things like centers of excellence. There are people who you can turn to people for advice on these issues. So a great deal is being done, actually. But somehow, when it comes to implementation, there are pressure points, sticking points where there is a whole lot of money being invested into into development, you can have projects, you can have new products, but when it comes to really implementing these things in society, there is friction. It's not as smooth as we would like in pursuing this social target, really, because you might have this fantastic new product, but if nobody uses this fantastic new product, then it is not contributing to achieving any societal goals. So these things have to be combined, and there has to be a certain transfer from one side to the other. You're right, it's like a critical mass. Yes, a critical mass, but there also has to be people who believe that they can perform this transfer across those two and you have to also understand the way people talk about these things with all of the terminology that goes with that. Well, yes, it's not just about having little asides of people thinking a certain thing and being more of a minority. It's about having a bit more power, no? Would you agree? I think you have to be a bit provocative about this. You have to be more courageous. But who is you? You have to be, well, people in private sector, startups. We should give startups more opportunities. Adrian's nodding. And I get emotional when I think about this, about South Korea, where startups are really being fostered, where there is this point system. And for me, as a startup in Switzerland, I'm really struggling to get going. But this is the thing, you have to specify. When you say you have to, people in general, well, society, yes, but who is society? Well, dear presenter, I am on the panel here today. I discuss this with you, with the panel. This message is carried out into the world, and we ask ourselves, how can we make this happen in the future? We have to share and take joint responsibility. Yes. Okay, well, Adrian, you say that Gabbana is changing the rules and procuring in a very different way. Now, this is a good approach in terms of your strategy, but surely that's not enough. So what is it that you want? Well, I think in very practical terms, we need more efficient models so that we can overcome the structures that are already present in the economy, because it has to be better than what we had before for it to break through. This might require subsidies, but it's really about recognizing that we're a few steps ahead, yes, but there are very many small contributions that make up this bigger whole. And I think you think about a school of fish and you have a tiny fish, but if you have a school of fish and they're all together, then the mass is so much bigger than, say, a shark. And I think that's a really fitting image. And you might have certain people perceiving their competition and feeling that their competition has the upper hand, and then maybe people need to join together in a more collective way to have a bit of a greater mass on the market. This is the way I like to think of it, and so this is where the power can come from, surely. I think you were always progressive, no? But you also said before this panel that you wanted to see large-scale retailers, wholesalers be approached in a different way. Well, yes, this is another example, not necessarily in a political way, but there are several, say, small suppliers who are juxtaposed with this huge wholesaler they can barely compete with. What do you do with that? If you can't make it fully transparent, otherwise nobody would buy anymore. But you start with those smaller retailers and you start to foster them and you start to find value in them. And I think that is something that is it's enjoyable for me, and I hope it will be pursued further. So this then is transferred to policy making, where policy making might need to provide better options, quite simply, so that the tables can be turned. And so progress can be made. Yes, and you're very welcome to say that two wholesalers, two of the big fish, are cooperatives, are they not? Oh, well, yes, they are. But over the past few years, I'd say that connection between sustainability in procurement at co-op, that seems to be much more readily approach than in Migros. But in every area, it's dealt with in a different way. But it plays a very, very important role indeed. But what matters is the actions that are actually taken at the end of the day. Well, perhaps we can tack onto that then and see how that pulls into our topic, really. Perhaps power is not exactly the right word. I think what we have at the moment is a great degree of resistance to change. It is very difficult to introduce change into a system. And if you say that those who are forward-looking have perhaps greater access to this than those who are very present in the moment, then I think what you have to do is level the playing field in terms of the way people see things to make sure that they can contribute. It's not that people aren't willing to contribute, it's just that they are doing their jobs. They are part of this system and not rocking the boat. They're simply taking the path of least resistance. And that's quite right. This is the same as in policy making, is it not? Right, but we can have an impact on these incentives. We can contribute to this transformation, and this requires transfer or translation, knowing what we're talking about. Okay, so not necessarily an appel to individuals, but what you really need then is new policies. So really, we expect change from policymakers. What is it that we expect? Well, I think in policy making, we have homework left to do. If I think back to the FDP as it was back in the day, and I think about Padro, who really stood up for the weakest in society, I don't think we're actually in that same mindset right now. You have two different cooperatives that are just social entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial companies only when it comes to negotiating prices. Okay, but maybe there are others who are far fairer in sales, say. But my call to action to policymakers would be things like in the competition committee. Let's talk about these things. Competition. Surely competition is distorted for me as a startup. What is it that you meant with that vis-a-vis wholesalers then? I'm not sure I quite understood that. They have a great deal of influence and they are different to a certain degree, but that's about foodstuffs, isn't it? Yes, co-op, say, can be particularly efficient in implementing sustainability in its procurement, but both of the big fish are pretty good on a global scale.
Well, I mean, we could break this down all the way down to an individual company, Swiss producers, or to you, your company, or you as a social enterprise. But what's the biggest hurdle you've come across? You say that social or ecological commitment is not valued sufficiently, isn't it? Yes, we're about to vote on pesticides and drinking water. Competition and the market and what product is going to be sold for what price. I mean, this is something we could influence. What conditions am I given when I shop? Am I aware that I'm supporting a certain company that is not fair? I mean, I have the decision. I can decide whether I'm going to shop from Migros or from Coop or rather a smaller company that is fairer. Let's ask our researcher what would accelerate things most. I mean, you have gathered a great deal of information during the project you worked on. I believe that there's two major topics that we need to think of if we talk about framework conditions. First of all, what can be asked for in a tender, for example. In a tender, you can make sure that ecological and social criteria are met. But Melanie said earlier on that we are resistant when it comes to transformation. So there's where we need to change. If you want to get information on social enterprises, you will find them. And if you look for financing, you will find them in most cases. But what we are overlooking is that there is a huge potential that we have not tapped into yet. And this means that when there is a tender, we need to consider other factors apart from social or ecological criteria. Maybe we should look at what other countries do. What do other countries do to make people aware of social enterprises? You can have information meetings, or you can have workshops. You can inform school children. You can organize fairs where you inform people of what a social enterprise is, and that would bring about this change and enable us to tap into that potential. So even if there are social or ecological criteria or financing available, maybe people just don't know anything about it and they're not aware of it, and they will therefore not ask for it. So we have to inform people, we have to make a general population aware of what is at stake and what is on offer. I believe that this brings these two questions together. The case studies we've looked at have shown that quite often there's a commitment on governmental level, a clear commitment to promote social economy, with commitment to inform society as a whole about social enterprises. You've mentioned Quebec, so there's programs in Canada. Well, both Canada and the other countries and cities I mentioned, the UK as well, have launched social initiatives, and there's a similar initiative on a European level. That kind of initiatives will then make consumers aware of social enterprises. I believe that things are changing, especially in the fashion industry. What about organic agriculture? You mentioned it earlier on, didn't you? Well, we know when it comes to agriculture what we give particular value to, a particular type of hedges that are used to separate fields, or particular apple trees that are different from the mass agriculture plants normally used. I do understand what you mean by change of mindset, but I'm quite skeptical. I think we need to be pragmatic. We need to define new goals that change the way we do business and that are easily achievable, and that would get the economy started. We are reaching the end of this panel. My question to you before we end is, what is your message to new startups or consumers even? Do you have any tips? Do you have any demands? Melanie? Well, my message is that you should get support and help from those people you think will not give it to you. Write to them, call them, or call those people who inspire you. And in most cases, these people will react. I'm talking of politicians, governments, local governments, companies. If you have something to tell it loud. Start communicating with people. Usually a dialogue will be initiated. Well, I have quite a lot of demands when it comes to politics, but if I think of entrepreneurs, I'd say something entirely different. I'd say take care of the problem you want to solve. Think of the people you want to help, and then just be very determined. Well, this is a lesson I've learned during my long years as an entrepreneur. We have to find solutions for problems. That's our main purpose. Well, but you wouldn't mind if things were to change in politics, wouldn't it? I would tell our government, if I could, that they should stop protecting the major banks and start helping small companies. What about you? Well, if there's any startup founders watching who trying to find the best way to launch their company, I'd say, well, be brave, but get a good sounding board. Get wise women, wise men around you to support you. I believe it's a good thing to have different generations around the table. I'd like to have an 80-year-old person or a 15-year-old person advising me. It's about doing it together. I've always said that together we're stronger. If you have a group of people around you who believes in an idea and won't give up, then you already won. Well, let's have science, the last word. The network, that's my advice to you. Make sure that you connect with the right people. The minute you have a group of social entrepreneurs, a network that will start buying from each other and can mobilize even more companies, then you can start a movement, and that's fundamental, especially when it comes to visibility of this industry. You need to have organizations such as Sense, and it's important that that kind of platform is created because we need to bring people together and make our sector more visible. That way we enable people to understand what we're about. The more people, the more different social entrepreneurs start pulling forces, the stronger we will become. And I believe that we can achieve many things in Switzerland. Well, networking is particularly easy today. I hope that you found this panel interesting. If you have any questions you would like to ask in the chat, if you would like to commit yourself in the interest of social economy, then you're welcome to do it. Contact us, ask your questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And thank you to this dynamic panel. I'm sure we've learned a great deal, and we've just addressed now that the idea is to formulate demands, and Sense does just this. It formulates demands for better framework conditions and calls policymakers to action. If you would like to be part of this, contact Sense at the email address displayed below, info@sens-swiss.ch.